Hans, here we are. One of the things that really stand out when you're performing on your Endangered Guitar is that particular kind of high-level energy that you have, which is really something very much you. I think it really stands out in comparison with others. So I wonder, of course this is part of your personality, but how would you say that, where do you take that energy from? How did it, what is that in your musical expression that you're looking for that makes you somehow end up in that kind of energy levels?
I think it's probably just a personality thing. I am nervous to a certain point. I have always something to do. I bang on things all the time. And I feel also that my music is, from the very beginning, a struggle with that energy. I love to sometimes take it out, or get it out. In the very early days when I was really into jazz, I was like a lot playing the style of sonic rock. But on the other hand, I always felt this kind of energy is also just a very small part of what you can express musically, or what I can express musically. So there's always a struggle to take this down. And when you see that when I play my Endangered Guitar project, I'm sitting at a table and having the guitar flat in front of me, one of the main reasons to do it is really to get a lot of this energy, the surplus energy out of my playing, and concentrate more on the music.
Yeah, because it's the electric guitar is a very powerful instrument, but it's as if even that isn't enough for you. But also because you're using these very strong contrasts, that you go to some very explosive playing and then you pull back quite a lot and then you're back in at full speed. So the contrast is also very striking.
Mm-hmm.
But recently you've been interested in synthesizers, so you've been working with the modular synthesizers that you design, build and set up yourself. So is that because you're looking for a different kind of sound overall, or is it another side of your personality that you feel can better come out this way?
It has different reasons. If we talk again about the body and what it does with your instrument, it's also taking me away from an instrument that is very familiar to me, like the guitar, even that it's like flat on the table and so. But I do this kind of guitar playing for 25 years now, so it's still something that I know how to handle, but I feel it also is constrained, because when you know your instrument very well, you know the routes that you have to go, and it just prevents you a little bit in looking into new areas. And the idea of the synthesizer, for this thinking, is that I play with an instrument I do not have a physical history with. It doesn't have any keys. I'm not a keyboard player anyway, but of course if I had keys, it would immediately know a little bit what to do with this, because I play a little piano for composing and so on, so I know if it's C sharp or these kind of things. But my synthesizers have like joysticks, knobs, all these. So I always have to think first, what do I want to achieve musically now, and then figure out what to do. And I find it very helpful for concentrating what to do, like really being focused on the music, and then also thinking more in musical terms than in terms of like, oh, what's like, easy in the fingers. Of course, if you're playing in a more traditional environment and with your instrument that you know for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, if there's anything unclear, a weak moment, you have always some fallback strategies, that are in your fingers that always sound good. Yeah. And if you play with an instrument that you have no history with, you don't have fallback strategies. You have to absolutely concentrate on what is musically needed, and you have to do it. The other idea of the synthesizer is a more sonic idea. because I have been into live sound processing of my own instrument for 15 years. I built a software that allows me to process the sounds that I'm drawing from the guitar, and use my guitar playing and the sound itself as, with audio analysis, as a control source to process to change some of the parameters of the processing. So what it is you have these rich sound from noisy manipulations of the guitar that you then process and get down, and like, you know, with filters you focus in on certain parts and so on. And with synthesis, I felt like it is more interesting now for me to start building a sound from the ground up. With additive synthesis, you come up with a oscillation, a sawtooth wave or something like this. Then you add things to it. So it's just like not a top to bottom approach, but a bottom to top in terms of like sculpting and creating a sound. And I found this very interesting also to widen my scope on timbre.
So when you play a piece on the synthesizer, almost the process of sculpting the sound becomes a piece in itself until it reaches a certain character, and then you can develop it further from there. But the sort of the creation of the sound itself is part of the piece.
Yeah, as usual. I mean, in my Endangered Guitar project, it all starts with a tool that I put on the strings, whether it's a vacuum cleaner, whether it's a pot scratcher, whether it's like what many people do, crocodile clips or something. Yeah. It always starts with a sound and then gets processed.
So the processing for the Endangered Guitar is maybe what makes the guitar endangered, so to speak, because it takes it away from the typical guitar sound and into some very rich and abstract sonic area.
Yeah, it's well, first thing, the title came up in 1998 because I needed a title for a solo CD that I created. So usually titling in that kind of area takes most of the time, and I came up with that title because it looked good on the CD. It also was a little bit about this. This was a lot of like taking the guitar into new territories. So it was the idea of being endangered in terms of like that you all of a sudden don't even hear anymore that it is guitar. So that was of course obvious.
So that was where you started with these heavy processing of the guitar back in the 80s?
That was, well, that was actually, when you say heavy processing, that I originally started with already in the beginning of the 90s, yeah. Because one of my first endeavors was like extending the repertoire on the guitar, extending the sound, focusing on sound was of course that I bought lots of different, pedals, distortion pedals, several of them, then harmonizers, several of them, and then loop pedals. For example, 91, 92, I paid 2,000 marks for a loop pedal that gave me a fixed time of looping time of 2 seconds. So, and I created this enormous walls of sounds from still like traditional guitar playing. So it was already heavy processing then, but it was not very dynamic. These pedals don't react to anything. So I got, I got rid of those pedals and followed some other paths. And only I came back to the processing idea when in the 2000s laptops became widely available, so you could take your computer on to stage, you could travel with it and so on. I learned programming with Max MSP and started building a software that allows me to analyze the sounds and process them at the same time. So there is a gap between the beginning of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s where I wasn't that much into electronics. the sounds that I created at that time were mostly sticks, stones, metals, EBOs, motors, and whatever on heavily modified guitars with multiple pickups all over the guitar and so on.
So I know that you also work as a composer and you have the Third Eye Orchestra and so forth. So I was wondering, how do you see the connection between this richer sound world and how do you construct then a piece? I mean, an improvisation or a composition of yours, how do you manage time, and what is the need for the different sound colors to do that? Do you have a particular approach that you favor, or how do you manage time?
I think it's all about sound in general, and chamber orchestra gives you so many other options about sound than a guitar or a synthesizer. It's just like a different viewpoint on sound, except that for a chamber orchestra you have to have people playing it. In the beginning of the Third Eye Orchestra, around 2005, for me it was often about, though I had 15 people at my disposal, I was more like creating small subsets of sounds. It's the voice plus a contrabass flute plus a cello. The next, it morphed into something between piano, drum set, clarinet, and bass or something. You know, it's like all these small groups moving about, and then, although it is also a little bit of waste, you have all these people there. What do you do with when everybody's playing? So meanwhile, over the years, I'm now writing really a lot of stuff where it's just like really built from the ground up across all 16 or 17 players, depending on the size of the ensemble, which still then is punctuated with individual solos or so, but a lot of the stuff is really, the entire ensemble is playing. In terms of time, the Third Eye Orchestra is more rhythmically oriented than the Endangered Guitar project, because with this electronic stuff, I feel the richness of the sound draws me more in than the rhythmic quality. And what I'm doing with the Third Eye Orchestra is a lot of my techniques are phase techniques. So I'm creating parts that are in 5/4 versus parts that are in 7/4, and they all start at the same time, and building these overlapping things. Nothing new in music, of course, but I am really happy with how this comes out, and these works that I'm having are not only like, 5 and then 7, they are sometimes like 50 bars long, and some other thing is like 30 bars long, so they have these very slow moving
so it's like
structure.
A constant slow morphing of the sound in different ways. So how do you communicate to the players? Because I don't think that you're writing full scores. You're using other ways to communicate to the players what you want to do, and you probably also make decisions on the moment.
Yes, I improvise, which is something that is true for all my live performances, regardless of what instrument I'm playing. Does not mean that I can't play in other environments, notated stuff or something, but for this Third Eye Orchestra, the Endangered Guitar, improvisation is the main thing. It has also something to do with like what's happening in the moment with the room. Every performance is different just because the room is different. Every performance is different because solo by somebody else might drive me into a very different area. But how do I do this with all this heavy writing? I write the patterns out. Again, like some are short, these days are more longer, going sometimes over several pages. Each has a number or a letter, and I call them up whenever I feel they're ready to go. Everything is like heavily written, heavily rehearsed beforehand. I absolutely need people who are top-notch when it comes to do sight reading, because you're sitting there and all of a sudden I call something up F2 or something like this, you know. I wait still until everybody is ready, but it takes just a few seconds, and then I count it in, and F2 will be then superimposed by one section, one group over another pattern that another group is playing, and you do not know what's happening. Maybe after F2, A1 is coming, and then C3 or something. So you see, then on the videos on YouTube, that sometimes people are very rapidly going through the score to then go to the thing that they're playing. So you cannot, as a player, you know, expect that I go from A through F or something.
So you're using the players as sound sources, as you would actually be thinking of it in terms of when you're working on the synthesizer, how different things combine, or different processing in the, Endangered Guitar. So what's where are you now? What's your main interest now? How do you see that these different areas of your musical interest they are developing? Do you have some specific plans, or what's in the future?
Well, first is when we talk about the Third Eye Orchestra, we're playing at the Victoria Festival in a few weeks, and for that I wrote even longer parts together, and right now I'm a lot into interlocking patterns, working also with parts where one group starts a phrase that is taken over by another group and then concluded by a third one, and I can then take groups of musicians out and juxtapose them with each other. I wrote a couple of hockets, stuff like this is just where I am right now. I would also like to mention here that this ensemble always works with live sound processing. My wife Daphne Naftali, who does live sound processing for over 20 years, she usually processes either individual performers out of the group when they're playing their solos, or the entire orchestra. So this is still, the electronic component is part of that as well. And I continue that.
But it's becoming more orchestral thinking than it was before, perhaps, if you're working with longer structures and more consciously about how they combine.
Yes. Then I have also another version. The Dark Circuits Orchestra is an ensemble solely from electronic instruments, where I'm looking for performers who build their own instruments, so that I'm not having, like, you know, the ubiquitous, you know, the laptop orchestra thing where everybody has the same instrument playing. I look for individuals who create their own idiosyncratic setup, whether it's like with crazy turntables, no input feedback mixers or whatever. And I create pieces for large ensembles for that. Here I am now interested in developing a light system around it, because I felt from our recent performances a few years ago, the idea using light, some visuals to it would be very interesting, but I'm also looking for light performers who have also their own very individual and idiosyncratic setup. The reason here is, of course, when you do electronic music, there's always some video going on. The only difference is if you have sound, it's coming from everywhere. You cannot even, you know, avoid it. But then you're, again, on the video, you're just like glued to the rectangle. And we're glued to the rectangle all day long. We wake up, we look at our iPhones, then we look at our rectangle at the computer, and then later we look at another rectangle on the TV, and then we go to a show and we see another rectangle, you know? And at that point I found light a completely different quality, because light will, people work with light bulbs, LEDs, stuff like this. This also envelopes the audience in a totally different way. You could also, of course, do this with, you know, visuals, video that is also surrounds video. But I'm really interested in lights and want to augment my Dark Circuits Orchestra with this light performance as well. So this is another strain of like work that I'm pursuing. in terms of the endangered guitar. The endangered guitar is at a point where it cannot be developed further without having put like some major effort in it. The endangered guitar has, because I programmed a couple of like random functions in it, it surprises me as an improviser. As an improviser, I need to be surprised. Something that I can completely control is not so interesting for me. So I'm still working especially with my solo performances. The endangered guitar is a little bit playing with a duo partner that, you know, I do something, but it surprises me with like some random function that I didn't expect. But it's not really an improvising machine yet because it doesn't have memory. And I think to make it an improvising machine, the machine also needs to know what was happening like 10 minutes ago, or maybe the last concert before, or 3 years ago or something. You know, improvisation rests on and depends on history and experience. So my machine doesn't have any history or experience. So to build it really out, to go and step forward with the endangered guitar software would mean to make it an improvising machine. Everything else, the way all the processing that's there, how it works with rhythm and everything is like, you know, as I want, and to tweak it a little bit here and there is not so interesting. So I'll see how that goes.
So you would need to build a kind of a high level, autonomous system that can make decisions and in this way become a real partner then to you.
Yeah, I mean there are precedents. Robert Rowe has done these things, George Lewis or so. This is like all out there, but I would have to find my own way because this is not about pitch. This would be about timbre, about sound. So I don't know. If somebody gives me a lot of money, I would do it, but it would really mean a lot of programming over a long time. However, I used that software also to make a version where I process other people. So it's not only that it processes my guitar. I use iPads or Cuneo as a controller, and I did a few things where I process other people, like most notably Damon Maroney. I created we produced a CD a while ago where I processed his hyper piano. I did a CD with my longtime collaborator Christoph Irmer where I was processing his violin. I played with him for over 30 years, I know what he's doing. And Satoshi Takeshi and I created a recording for Clang where my guitar is still on there, but in many cases I just process his percussion set as well. So the software is still good for processing anything.
Yeah. So you can say that the endangered guitar is in danger of becoming extinct almost, not because it's morphing into other uses and so forth. So.
This is the funny thing. I often say this is like it is only endangered, but it's not extinct. And then I always come back to the guitar. But right now, I would say, as little guitars I'm playing these days, other instrument, writing for larger ensembles, having other ideas, curating events, so on, maybe the guitar becomes extinct at some point.
Thank you very much, Hans. Very nice conversation.
Thank you.